All right, welcome back to class, everybody. Today we're going to switch our topic of discussion from the knee to the ankle and foot. And over the next week or so, we'll start talking about gait and walking. Today, what we're going to do is talk about shin splints or medial tibial stress syndrome. And we're also going to talk a little bit about hyperpronation. We'll probably get to that towards the end of the lecture today. Does anybody have any questions about what we went over the last couple of days? Everything has been posted on YouTube, so feel free to take a look at that over and over. I also have to finish assignment number 3, so I'll get that done by Friday. I'll probably get it tomorrow afternoon. But other than that, it seems as though we're right on schedule and everything is finished. So if nobody has any comments or questions, then I'm going to start my screen share and get everything going. I appreciate your attendance and your attentiveness. All right, so let's take a look at the lecture for today. Today we're going to start the lecture regarding the foot and the ankle, and we'll get into some information about walking. And walking is such a beautiful, I guess, connection or sequence rather of amazing things that goes on. And I don't know if you've ever necessarily thought about it, but at the beginning of the semester, we talked about this notion that the brain does everything and it does it all at once. And if that's your idea of motor control, or if that's the idea of how your brain works or how your body works, then you're going to have to explain things that are difficult. Like, how is it the case that you can walk all day, every day, and seemingly not think about it? That because when I'm walking, I'm not thinking about how my foot is falling into the ground and what my tibialis anterior is doing and whether or not my ankle is going to plantar flex, or whether or not my knee is going to bend, or where the energy is coming from. I don't even think about walking. These days we have those little Fitbits, and in order to achieve, I guess, the daily requirements for walking, you're supposed to take 10,000 steps. Now, I might take 5,000 or 13,000, but I don't really think about any of those steps. And some of those steps are in the midst of doing other things. Like I'll be coaching and spotting a back handspring on floor, and I'm, crab walking, to my left side so I can spot a back tuck. And those all count as steps, but I'm thinking about the approaching gymnast and where I'm going to spot, not getting punched in the face as I spot. I'm not thinking about my steps at all. So I want to have a little bit of a discussion about how walking occurs and how maybe the brain doesn't control everything. All right, maybe what I should do is I should have a little bit of a discussion about the term escapement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about clocks for a couple of minutes here. All right, and I'm going to annotate. I'm going to go my mouse. I'm going to go escape here. And I'm going to just talk about a term called escapement and what an escapement is. All right, let me open this up here. Now, let's say I have a pendulum. All right, pendulum is a stick. And at the end of the stick, I have some type of weight. And that weight is going to tick back and forth. All right, it's going to go back and forth. And now, if there's friction, usually what's going to happen is the weight is, I'm going to lift the weight all the way to here. It's going to tick to here. And then because of friction, it's not going to go back as far. And it's not going to go back as far this way. And it's not going to go back as far. And eventually what's going to happen is that pendulum is going to stop. All right, it's going to stop at a particular point. If you look at dynamical systems or even differential equations, this is going to be called a point attractor, because the motion of this particular pendulum is attracted to one point in space, a point attractor. All right, I think attractor has two T's, a point attractor. So this is one kind of dynamic, that exists with systems is point attractor dynamics. Now, there's other kind of dynamics, like for instance, I have the sun and I have planets that revolve around the sun, and those aren't point attractors. All right, what they do is they make like a circle and they continue along this circle forever. This is called a limit cycle dynamic. So this is a limit cycle. And you think about a lot of different actions in the human body, and they either mirror a point attractor or limit cycle dynamics. For instance, let's talk about, maybe I'll put John on the spot right now because he's fun and intelligent. John, do you think that reaching and grasping an object is a point attractor or a limit cycle dynamic?
A point attractor.
Exactly right. Right? What's happening is your hand is going, and you could argue it goes halfway to the object and then another halfway to the object and another halfway until it's so close to the object that it can reach out and grab the object. It's just reaching towards a particular point in space. What about walking, John? Is that a point attractor or a limit cycle?
I think a limit cycle.
Right, because it's something that repetitive over and over and over, and it just stops at this particular I guess cycle or recursive dynamic. All right, John, what about chewing? Limit cycle or point attractor?
Limit cycle.
Correct. Even what about getting up and doing your chores for the day and living your day? I mean, every day is, you got the sun comes up, you got to get up, you do your work, you go home, you eat dinner, you relax a little bit, the sun comes up, you do your work. What is that? That's going to be a limit cycle or point attractor dynamic. Which one, John?
Limit cycle.
Right. What about driving down a highway towards a destination?
Limit cycle.
So you're driving down a highway and eventually you're going to get to one particular spot. Right? You got your idea of your directions. You know exactly where you're going to go eventually. It's not this repetitive action that occurs. It's more of a point attractor. You're attracted to a point on the earth. You're getting in your car and you're driving to that point. It's a point attractor dynamic. All right. Walking is a limit cycle. Going somewhere is a point attractor. All right. Now, let me just explain a little bit more about, say, for instance, now, because we have gravity, lots of things achieve this point attractor dynamic. And because your legs and your arms are pendulums, and we have gravity on this earth, you would think that maybe walking would also follow this point attractor dynamic. But it doesn't. So let me explain a little bit more about this point attractor dynamic. Let's say you have a grandfather clock. And in the grandfather clock, usually there is a bunch of gears. And we'll just make one other gear over here. I don't want to belabor the picture. It'd take too long. So you have some gears. And then what happens is attached to this gear, you'll have like maybe a pulley. And that pulley, I'll make it with a different color here. That pulley has like a cable or some type of spring that's wound. And then it has like this long string that goes down the end. And at the end of the long string is a weight. And then what you have is a big, huge, gigantic, long pendulum. And now this pendulum is going to swing back and forth. This is in your old grandfather clocks that's in your grandparents' place, a grandfather. All right. And then you're going to have this ticking back and forth like this. And in order for a grandfather clock to work, John, what do you have to do every once in a while? In order for an old watch to work, what do you have to do every once in a while?
You have to fix the time.
Sort of. What you have to do is you have to wind it. Everybody's aware of winding a clock. These days, you don't have to wind a clock anymore. But you used to have to wind a clock. All right. Now, what else happens is attached to this this cable or wire or whatever that's holding on to this weight, there's another little a little thing that like reaches out. Let me make it into a different color. Reaches out, and now this is just a drawing, so it's not 100% right, and I don't even know how a clock actually like works or is engineered, but we'll just put this little arrow here. So typically what would happen, John, is this clock, this pendulum inside the clock would swing this way, and then just like the other pendulum, it would dissipate into its natural tendency, because we have gravity and friction on this earth, to stop at a point attractor. All right, now if I graph that point attractor from above, it would look something like this. All right, where the friction makes this cycle decrease and decrease and decrease and decrease until it stops. Now, why doesn't the pendulum inside a grandfather clock stop? Because as we all know, grandfather clocks last for, I don't know, at least 24 hours so that you can tell the time. And I'm assuming most grandfather clocks, one second, I don't know why that happened. And I would say for the most part, grandfather clocks last more than a day. I don't know. I don't know what the typical length of a grandfather clock lasting is. But John, why doesn't this pendulum in the grandfather clock reach this point attractor dynamic so that it stops? What's up with that? And what does winding a clock or winding a watch do in the first place? Well, we all know that potential energy, all right, potential energy, let's say energy, and we'll call it potential, is equal to what, John? Do you know what potential energy is equal to?
I don't know.
All right, it's equal to mass times the acceleration due to gravity, mg, and then h, and height. Potential energy is mgh. So at some point, this clock is going to start to lose energy because of friction until the pendulum stops ticking entirely, and now the clock doesn't work anymore. And what we're going to do is we're going to add energy, just like if you're pushing someone on a swing, right? If someone's pushing on a swing and they go this way and they go that way, all right, and at the end of a swing, and they're sitting up here and they're having so much fun on the swing, like this, and their feet are over the edge. Eventually, as they get back to this point, somebody here is going to do what, John? What are they going to do when that person gets to the end of the swing on this side over here? In order to keep this person on the swing going forever, this person here is going to have to do what to that person, John?
Push them.
They're going to have to push them. They're going to have to add energy into this system here to keep the system moving. Otherwise, what happened, it will slow down. But then the person pushes you and it slows down. And then it pushes you and it slows down. And it pushes you and they slow down. But right here, all right, is added energy. And again, a little bit of added energy. And that energy has to be added at just the right time. Just the right time. And if the energy is added at the right time, what happens is this pendulum escapes its normal pattern of dissipating and slowing down so that that person continues swinging. So energy has to be added at just the right time. This person here doesn't need to run and push and push and push and push and push, and then turn around and push and push and push and push and push, and then likewise turn around and turn around and turn around. The pushing from this person here doesn't have to be constant. It has to be enough, and it has to be at the right time. So this person right here doesn't have to do everything all at once. It only has to do what it needs to do when it needs to do it. So the energy lost because of friction is added by this person swinging on a swing set. And I'm sure that you've experienced by pushing someone on a swing set that you don't have to push this person with all of your might. You just have to push a little bit. You just have to replace the amount of energy that's lost. And when I was a kid and I was on a swing, that was fun. It felt like you're flying. I love being on a swing. So what happens is this person here, the person who's pushing, allows for the person on the swing or the pattern on the swing to escape, all right, what they normally would experience. And what they normally would experience is some type of dissipation or friction such that swinging on a swing would eventually become a limit cycle. So this is called, this person here is escaping or is allowing for this pattern to escape its natural tendency to slow down to a point and stop. This person here is called an escapement. They're adding energy at just the right time to allow this natural pattern of slowing down to stop. And that's what happens in a grandfather clock. At first, when you wind the clock up, this weight is like here. You wind the clock up, you have a big dial over here. I don't know how a grandfather clock works, but there's a big dial, you wind it up, it takes this weight that's down here and it pulls the weight all the way up as you wind it. Then as the pendulum ticks this way and ticks that way, it hits a lever here up in the gears and it allows this weight to drop from here and it drops down just a little bit. All right? Drops down to here. And then the weight goes this way and the pendulum goes that way. It trips the lever, and the lever allows the weight to drop from there to here. And there's a loss of potential energy. But as the weight drops, there's also another mechanism that pushes on the pendulum. And it adds the energy back to the pendulum. So the pendulum goes this way, it loses energy and drops this way. It hits a lever, the weight drops. That dropping weight takes a little bit of a, I don't know, it's probably some type of like bar or something that pushes back on the pendulum, and it adds the energy lost. Now, this device right here, this here is called an escapement. An escape. An escape. I don't know if there's an E there, but I'll put it there. An escapement. And it's called an escapement because this mechanism here of this weight dropping and dropping and dropping and dropping and dropping. Now, when the weight drops all the way down here and this cable is completely extended, John, what do you have to do then? Gonna have to wind the clock up again, pull the weight all the way up to here. Give the clock more potential energy, and then the clock can release this potential energy here, release the height of that weight, and kick the pendulum so it can keep going. That's what winding a clock does. Stores energy in potential energy, and that energy is released so that the clock can continue to tell time. But that escapement doesn't work all the time, right? The escapement is working intermittently. All right, the weight isn't falling all the time. It falls when it needs to. All right, it falls when it needs to, and it doesn't do everything. It's not, the escapement is in charge of these gears here, and it's not in charge of the pendulum. The escapement happens when it needs to, and it only does what it needs to do. Now that is strikingly similar to when you're pushing someone on a swing. Like when you're pushing someone on a swing, you don't have to push them continuously. You push them at one moment, all right? And that moment is when the person on the swing swings all the way back to their apex. Then and only then, all right, at that particular time, you add energy to the system. The person goes all the way this way. And while they're swinging all the way from here to here and then back again, this person here doesn't have to do anything. This person here adds energy at just the right time, and the rest of the motion happens totally for free. And then you're right, at the end of that motion, they would have to push again and push again, but they don't have to do everything all at once. They only have to do what they need to do when they need to do it. This person here, the pusher, and the dropping of this weight incrementally with each of these pendulum swings allows for the natural reaction of a point attractor that's exacerbated by friction and even in some instances, air resistance to be escaped. Okay? I like to try to think of the brain as an escapement as opposed to something that does everything all at the same time. Because when you have something that does everything all at the same time, how can it do anything well? And how can it do anything else aside from what it's supposed to do? And I don't recall thinking about my motion very much at all. So at the beginning of the course, maybe what we thought of is the brain does everything all at once. But maybe actually what it does is it only does what it needs to do when it needs to do it. So as we talk about human gait, what we're going to try to do is eliminate the need for the brain to do everything, because that's not really realistic. So let me show you an example of how the brain might not have to do everything. All right, does anybody have any questions about the term escapement or anything that we just went over? Okay, so let's go back to our lecture here. And let me erase all these drawings. And let's talk about this picture right here. Hold on. Access the microphone, don't allow, end show. Yes, that's fine. Play from start. All right. So let's take a look at this ankle here. All right, now, what does a heel do? You ever thought about what does your heel do, John? What's the point of a heel? Is a heel just something that happens because of genetics? Or is it Wolff's Law? Is there some type of functional benefit of having a big protruding bone behind your ankle? Well, it's a bit of a loaded question because the answer is, of course, yes, there is a reason for a heel. So let's take this and let's just draw here. All right, and then let's say, for instance, you have, John, would you agree that at your ankle, maybe there's an axis of rotation here at your toes, but would you agree that there's probably an axis of rotation here? Is that fair to say?
Yes, it would be.
Okay, so, and now when I'm walking, my heel is going to hit the ground. If I'm walking, my heel will hit the ground first. If I'm not walking and I'm running, sometimes people would suggest, and I would even suggest, a forefoot strike as opposed to a rear foot strike when you're running. But when you're walking, all right, most likely what's going to happen is you're going to have a rear foot strike at the heel. Meaning when you're walking, your foot's going to hit the ground kind of like this. Here's the ground. And your heel is going to hit the ground first. What does that do? Well, let's take a look at this. And whoopsies. And when I'm walking, how does walking happen? Does my brain make walking happen, or does the walking happen automatically? And how could it happen automatically? Well, let's just take a look at this picture here in regards to torque and forces and stuff. So I'm going to take this line of action of the ground reaction force, right? So when my heel hits the ground, when the force of body weight hits the ground, in order for the ground not to crush underneath my own weight, Right, this is the ground here, and I'm going to undo that, make it a different color so it's a little bit clearer to see. In order for the ground not to crush under the weight of my heel hitting it, the ground is going to push back up in this direction with a particular force. And let's call that force here the ground reaction force. So we'll call that the ground reaction force. So there is indeed coming down here a force as well, and we'll call that the force due to body weight. But then you also have this equal and opposite force called the ground reaction force. The heel hits, the ground pushes up on it. Well, why does my foot go from this position here when I hit the ground? It goes from this position here, and then my foot is going to hit the ground, and my toes are going to rotate in that direction. Why does that occur? Well, it occurs because if you take a look at this, I have now a moment arm here. The force doesn't happen directly underneath the axis of rotation. The ground reaction force happens at the heel, and the heel is somewhat removed from the axis of rotation. Because of that, it's going to take this heel here, and it's going to cause a rotation or a torque such that the heel is going to now rotate in that direction. But because the heel is attached to the foot, it's going to cause the foot to rotate in that direction. All right, so what the heel does is the heel creates a moment arm. And that moment arm here creates a torque. There's going to be a torque here due to the ground reaction force. That should say GRF. I wish I did it a little bit cleaner, but we'll be okay with it. And that torque associated with the ground reaction force is what allows that foot to flop down into the ground. It allows the foot to go from dorsiflexion to plantar flexion. That's not a brain thing. That's why when you walk, you've never ever considered whether or not this step was going to result in plantar flexion. I've never thought of that in my entire life. In the 10,000 steps I took yesterday and the day before, in the 10,000 steps I'm going to take today, I've never ever thought of that one time. Now, this motion of the foot happens for free. It happens because you have a heel, because of torque, because of ground reaction force, because of Newton's laws, because of physics, not because of a brain signal. That to me is pretty astounding. When we talk about the connection or the constraint between structure and function, this is a perfect example. Right? Without a heel, it would force this ground reaction force to occur much closer to the axis of rotation than it does. And if the ground reaction force actually happened right underneath the axis of rotation, there wouldn't be any torque associated with the ground reaction force, and I wouldn't have any foot drop. So now the question is if the ground reaction force forces this heel to rotate in this direction, what stops my feet from slapping into the ground 10,000 steps a day? Right? If that happens automatic, why doesn't my foot bang into the ground and slap into the ground? It's called a foot slap. Why doesn't that happen? Well, because I have other things that are working like muscles. All right, so let me just erase these drawings and go a little bit further here. So I have a muscle here called my tibialis anterior. I'm not going to draw it perfectly. I'll do the best I can. All right, it's right here. You can see the tendon here. Tendon will come around and attach to the bottom of your foot. And when the heel hits the ground is going to cause this forward rotation of your foot. And what happens at that moment is your tibialis anterior fires eccentrically. It fires eccentrically to stop that from happening. All right. And if this muscle here fires eccentrically with enough strength, it will slow the plantar flexion or the movement of the foot in that plantar direction. All right. But one thing happens is once I get to this position here, though, and my foot is fully extended, this tibial, it's going to make that change. This tibialis anterior now is as extended as it can be. All right. And I'm going to erase this a little bit. Let's just go to here. Whoops. Whoops. Sorry, let me just get the drawings correct. So now the muscle is pretty contracted. And as the foot goes into plantar flexion, it's going to be relatively extended. Well, we've looked at before the length tension relationship. And when a muscle is extended as far as it can be, this is length and this is tension. Remember, when the muscle gets as long as it can be, it can no longer create an active tension. So as this foot gets into plantar flexion, it pulls the tibialis anterior and stretches it. So the actin and myosin filaments in this muscle can no longer interact because their cross bridges are too spread apart. The actin and myosin can barely interact with each other. And if the actin and myosin can't interact with each other, the only way for this tension here to be withstood is through passive tension. The passive tension of that muscle tendinous unit. And the tibialis anterior has a tendon that goes all the way down here, but on this side of the joint, on the proximal aspect of the joint, there is no tendon. It just attaches right to the tibia, right here, right to the tibial plateau, right here. Now, if I take 10,000 steps per day and my tibialis anterior is not strong enough eccentrically, then what's going to happen, especially because my tibia is now extended further than its resting or functional length, what's going to happen is all of this tension of my foot flopping in this direction and stretching that tibialis anterior, all of that tension is going into the passive component of that muscle. And because there's no tendon on this side of the muscle, all right, this side of the muscle starts to get irritated and actually pull away from the tibia. That's what shin splints is. All right. Shin splints is potentially caused by, number one, so many steps per day. Number two, the torque associated with the force of body weight. Number three, the fact that that tibialis anterior is pulled outside of its optimal length tension relationship and the actin and myosin cross bridges can't connect. Number four, if this individual is obese and there's a large force of body weight, therefore a large ground reaction force forcing that foot to flop down. And what happens, say, for instance, if you're running like a gymnast does on a surface that's matted or foam? Well, when this foot hits the ground, the foam is going to squish underneath it and allow the foot to plantar flex even more than it normally would, pulling that muscle even further out of the length tension relationship, overextending the muscle more, and putting more force or more stress on this muscle and bone connection here and making the problem even worse. So typically with gymnasts who are running and tumbling on squishy surfaces, if we don't pay attention to toe raises and toe raises, but also like eccentric heel lowers or intrinsic shin and ankle strength, then what happens is you start seeing kids complain about shin splints or medial tibial stress syndrome. But that's an injury or a mechanism of injury to the shin or to the ankle or the foot, whatever you want to call it. And that's not necessarily overuse if your tibialis anterior is strong enough, or if you're resting enough, or if you're not tumbling on such squishy surfaces. Sometimes you'll see in the gym, kids will vault on squishy mats, on like a carpet bonded foam. In our gym, I try to get the guys to vault on like a hard floor surface with a carpet on top, but not running on foam. Because when you run on foam, it just forces a little bit more plantar flexion because the foam gives under the weight of the body. So typically in gymnastics, you'll see a lot of shin splints, especially among young kids who don't do great intrinsic ankle strength, because they just don't have the tibialis anterior strength to stop the natural torque associated with the force of body weight and the moment arm associated with the heel. So that's what shin splints is. And next class on Monday, what we're going to talk about is like the next step further in terms of all of this. And we're going to talk about hyperpronation. And then for the last 2 days of class, what we're going to do is talk about how walking and the natural things that happen during walking store elastic potential and kinetic energy and conserve those things and create those pockets of energy so that the energy can be pushed back into the system like an escapement, so that it's walking that actually drives more walking and not the brain doing it. So hopefully at the end of the semester, instead of thinking that the brain does everything all at once, the new phrase that we would use is like an escapement, the brain does what it needs to do when it needs to do it. All right, and I think that that's what I would present to you today. Does anybody have any questions about what we went over? Zach, we good? Jasmine, we good?
Thank you.
I'm all good.
All right, John, I appreciate your help. All right, you're a good guy. I look forward to Monday's class. Remember, we don't have a lot of time left, so if you're trying to get me your exam corrections, Time is of the essence. Okay. All right. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Let me know if you need anything. You guys take care.